We have the participants frequency just rising up. It's 28 now because I think I opened it late, but we are recording it and it will be online and we'll be streaming it also on YouTube. I'll wait for 2 more minutes and I would love to introduce both of you after we have a welcome from Professor Satish. So, Professor Satish, let us just give ourselves 2 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, I think Professor Satish, I think we can start now. We have 50 and look forward to more. So, yes.
Thank you. Good morning, Kate, and all joining from UK and Europe. Good afternoon to all from India. Welcome to this important event. On behalf of the Future Earth Global Hub South Asia and Divyaja Center for Climate Change, I would like to welcome Kate and Zeenat for the much awaited co-note on the implication of the doughnut economy in the South Asian context. Thank you both for accepting our invitation and joining us today. We look forward to working with you both as we have recently established the Future Earth Global Secretariat at our institute. I request Smriti to introduce the speakers.
Thank you, Professor Satish. A pleasure indeed to introduce Kate and Zeenat both, and very much awaited, key co-note by both of you. We've been waiting for this for more than 6 months, and I'm glad we could have it today. So everybody, I think here knows Kate, but I would love to introduce her. So Kate is an economist focused on making economics fit for the 21st century realities. She holds a bachelor's in politics, philosophy and economics, and master's in economics for development, both from Oxford University. She's also the creator of the Doughnut of Social and Planetary Boundaries and co-founder of Doughnut Economics Action Lab. Kate is a senior associate at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute, where she teaches on the Masters in Environmental Change and Management. She's also the professor of practice at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, and over the past 25 years, Kate's career has taken her from working with micro entrepreneurs in the villages of Zanzibar to co authoring the Human Development Report for UNDP in New York, followed by a decade as senior researcher at Oxfam. Her internationally best selling book, Doughnut Economics, which I loved reading, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist, has been translated into more than 20 languages and has been widely influential with diverse audiences, from the UN General Assembly to Pope Francis to the Extinction Rebellion. So that's Kate. Thank you, Kate, for being here. Love to introduce Zeenat here also, who's here with us. She is the Senior Vice President and Chief Knowledge Officer of the Development Alternatives Group and has over 30 years experience in the social and environment development sector with a focus on the design and strategic action for sustainable human settlements. She is an architect and a planner by training with a specialization in housing and habitat development issues and additional training in policy analysis and advocacy. Her past work has included design of affordable eco-housing, delivery models, post-disaster housing reconstruction, interventions, habitat policy development at the national level, and sustainability assessments of construction technology and housing projects. She provides oversight to the policy studies and development action initiatives at the Development Alternatives Group. Her work addresses resilience building in human settlements through sustainable consumption and production strategies, especially green and inclusive circular economy models. She has been a founding member and co chair of the board of the Climate Action Network South Asia, member of the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Committee of the Sustainable Buildings and Construction Program of UN's One Planet Network, member of the CND Waste Subcommittee of the Niti Aayog on Construction and Demolition Waste Management in Urban Areas, Strategic Steering Committee member of UNEP program in India, and steering committee member of the Green Economic Coalition in India. She also contributes to the Global Green Growth Platform, and it's a delight to introduce both of them. In fact, I'm very proud to be announcing that we at the Divecha Center have just established a global secretariat for South Asia, the Future Earth Global Secretariat South Asia in IISc. And in December, we'll have a full functioning staff and an office. And it's an honor and it's just a pleasure to have the first talk on South Asia as we build a secretariat here in IISc. So I would not like to delay much, but I once again welcome all the guests here, the co-notes here, and we have 91 participants. Thank you so much for attending. We will also be live streaming it on YouTube. And I request all the attendees, all the observers, if you have any questions, please put it up in the Q&A section here for Kate and Zeenat to answer. We will have a talk of around 50 minutes, followed by 20 minutes of question and answers. So over to you, Kate and Zeenat.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here, and I'm particularly delighted that we're doing this event as a co-note rather than a keynote, because I believe that concepts and practice belong together. So it's wonderful to be presenting here with Zeenat.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Kate, and thank you, Smriti and Dr. Satish, for hosting us, and for Kate for inviting me to talk with her, because we've been in this discussion for some time, and her work really resonates with what we do. So I'm really, really happy that we could do this together. Thank you.
So the way we're going to go is I'm going to kick off by presenting the core concepts of Doughnut Economics and some of the frameworks that we've developed. And then I'm really delighted that Zeenat is going to take them into the South Asian context and really show how they connect with ongoing work there. So I hope that people will find these ideas enriching. I'm going to present from a global perspective, often from a global north perspective, bringing those ideas, because I want to highlight the contrast and the interesting comparisons that arise when we take these ideas into different contexts. So I shall share my screen and jump in and ask, how can humanity live in the donut? So I'm going to jump back into 20th century economics, which is what I studied at university. I believe the concepts that we are taught and that shape the way we think are profoundly influential in terms of what we see and what we don't see, what we put at the center of our vision and what we leave at the periphery. And I'm going to illustrate that with just 3 concepts from 20th century economics. The first image, and I would challenge anybody, if anyone who studied economics, if I ask this question the world over, what's the first image you remember learning in economics? It's almost always the same answer. It's supply and demand. And what that does is puts the market at the center of our vision on day one, as if economics was predominantly about the market, when actually it's about so much more than that. It also means that price becomes the metric of concern, and anything that falls outside of the price metric is called an externality. That means we can find ourselves in the absurd position of talking about the breakdown of the life support systems of planet Earth as environmental externalities. And that does not serve us. So I believe we need to move beyond this as a starting point. The selfie, the portrait of humanity at the heart of mainstream economic theory, is a character known as rational economic man. And if we drew him, he'd look something like this. He would be a man rather than a woman. He would have no dependence, no caregiving. He's got money in his hand because he's driven by the market. He's got ego in his heart of self-interest, and he's got a calculator in his head, ever calculating prices. He's also got nature at his feet, at the peak of the pyramid of living systems. And this character does not serve us if we are to thrive as 10 billion people on planet Earth. Telling ourselves that this is who we are gives us almost no chance of doing that well. Lastly, the goal. The goal of mainstream economic theory is so deep, it's almost never articulated, but it is endless growth, measured in national income or GDP, growing exponentially, so incrementally every year, no matter how rich a nation already is. And I say this knowing that many people in this conversation are sitting in India, but I'm sitting in the UK, one of the richest nations in the history of humanity. And yet our politicians and our governments here and our economists still also believe that the solution to our problems lies in yet more growth. There is no limit to that interest and pursuit. To me, this is an absurdity. So I want us to move away from these core concepts, and I want to rethink the shape of progress. It is not an ever rising line of endless GDP. I think these concepts have actually contributed very significantly to taking us to where we begin the 21st century with multiple crises, be it the financial meltdown of 2008, be it the ongoing climate and ecological breakdown, and the last years of COVID lockdown. These crises hit with extreme inequalities of gender, of race, of wealth and power between global North and global South. But they show us how interconnected we are with each other and the rest of the living world. And they emerge from systems based upon endless expansion, be it the endlessly expanding financial system that then undermines its own operations, endless expansion of use of Earth's resources, of fossil fuels and materials. We induce climate and ecological breakdown. And when human settlements endlessly sprawl and expand into areas of wildlife, coupled with global travel, we create perfect conditions for health pandemic and zoonotic disease transfer. We need to rethink the shape of progress. And so for this, I propose the one donut that actually turns out to be good for us. If you think of humanity's use of Earth's resources radiating from the center of this picture outward, the hole in the middle is a place where people are falling short. They don't have the resources they need to lead a life of dignity and opportunity and community. Leave nobody in the hole. But at the same time, we must not overshoot the ecological ceiling, because there we put so much pressure on the life support systems of planet Earth. We kick our planetary home out of balance. The inside 12 social dimensions I crowdsourced from the Sustainable Development Goals. So all the governments of the world have already agreed that no one in the world should fall short on these essentials. And the outer ring comes from the Earth system scientists who created the concept of planetary boundaries. We must protect the life support systems that make Earth a unique and delicately balanced living planet in the universe. So meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. We want to live in the green ring that is the safe and just space for humanity. And that depends upon creating a regenerative and distributive economy. If that's the goal, and the shape of progress is no longer endless growth, but thriving in balance, just like a heartbeat, we are very far from that now. As all the red here shows, the red inside the circle is the billions of people who fall short on their essential needs. The red wedge on food, for example, goes 11% of the way to the center of the circle, because 11% of people worldwide do not have enough food to eat every day. We can see there's human deprivation on all of those dimensions. Much of it, of course, across communities in the global South, and there is deprivation in the midst of plenty in places in the global North. At the same time, we are already overshooting multiple planetary boundaries. We are running down Earth's life support systems. So we must turn this story around from both sides at the same time. That's never been tried before. In the past, economists thought if we grow, we generate the income to meet our needs, we get everybody out of the hole. We now see that the way we have been growing is also destroying our planetary home. And so we must set out on a new path. And it's important to remember that last century's economic theories and legal systems and even architectural designs and government policies and business enterprise designs, none of them were designed to solve this problem because they didn't see this problem. We need to redesign all of those in our own era as a generation that takes responsibility for creating theories and practices and policies and concepts and enterprise that turn this story around. To me, it's the work of our generation and the work for which our children's children will judge us as the generation that knew. And what did we do once that we knew? I'm showing you here a picture of the whole world, but let's go down into zoom in to see some national donuts, all based on internationally comparable data. So you can see at one end, you have Malawi, a lot of human deprivation, not overshooting any of those planetary boundaries. India, still very significant human deprivation, some overshoot of planetary boundaries on carbon dioxide emissions and on fertilizer use. China, both significant shortfall and overshoot. And then the United States, like many, many high-income countries, scoring very well on the social foundation, but in very significant overshoot of planetary boundaries. And we can see that incomes are rising across this frame. So it raises the conundrum that no country has ever ended human deprivation without economic growth. But no country has yet ended ecological degradation with economic growth. And this is the paradox or the challenge that we must transform. If I put these countries on a grid of over 100, the sweet spot is the top left-hand corner where the donut is, where we meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. I'm showing the 4 countries that I just showed here. They all need to transform in a direction that countries have not moved before. We need to move at a right angle to the history of industrial impact. And I also want to recognize that for me, this means that there's no country in the world that should call itself a developed country. I invite everybody to remove that concept from their language. There's not one single high-income nation here that has the right to say it's developed, because it's made itself wealthy in ways that are utterly running down the living planet with obvious massive impacts on others. It's also a story of colonialism in the history and ongoing impacts of military power internationally, of trade and finance rules, of resource extraction, and the present and future impacts of climate change. All of these with a strong power dynamic, typically from the global north to the global south. So we need transformation between all countries and within all countries. How do we do that? Where do we begin? For me, the first picture of economics, if we want to begin this again, is not supply and demand, but we begin with what I call the embedded economy diagram. And we must recognize that the economy is embedded in society. It is a social construct and we can redesign it. And society, human society, is embedded in the living world, part of the rest of nature. We draw on living material and matter. We put out waste and we are bathed in a river of solar energy, which of course gives all life. But then let's zoom in and recognize that even within the economy, there are different ways we provision for our wants and needs. Now, mainstream economics takes us straight into the market where we may show up as a consumer or producer. And in that production relationship, we must always ask, is somebody a laborer earning merely a wage per day, or the capital owner earning the rent of the wealth creator? We also have the state, and 20th century economics highlighted these. In the state, we may be public servant, resident, voter, protester, all critical roles that we play in relation to the state. But this is just 2 parts of our relations. We also have unpaid caring work where we are parent, partner, relative, or child. It's where we begin every day in the household. And this is the work that reproduces human well-being, that gets labor ready for work, but it's unpaid and unnoticed, therefore, by mainstream economics, but essential to life. And again, the commons, where we may be a volunteer, a sharer, repairer, or co-creator or steward. Again, not often paid. Often the value created here is outside of market prices, but highly valued. So we need to recognize all 4 of these forms of organizing contribute to economic output and well-being and value. And of course, finance should be in service to enabling these sectors to thrive. What we, I think, have learned worldwide from COVID is that when the market space is physically closed, the state steps in and we have a big conversation about whose work is essential work. The household steps in with care, with childcare, and the commons step in with community kitchens, with caring for our neighbors. And one thing that people have said they don't want to lose after the COVID crisis is that bigger sense of a we, which I think in many global north cities and towns and nations has been lost and eroded and rediscovered through the solidarity that enduring the COVID struggle has created. So how can we then use this bigger frame to bring ourselves into the donut? If we recognize the red in this picture shows us that we have inherited deep inequalities and deep ecological degradation, then we need to change the designs of our planetary economy. We need to be distributive by design and regenerative by design. And I'll give some examples of what I mean of each of these. So if we want to change the future, we must change the economy's dynamics. We've inherited degenerative industrial systems where we take Earth's materials, make them into things we want, use it for a while, and then throw it away. We take, make, use, and lose. And this is running down Earth's life-supporting systems, whether we're cutting forests or emitting carbon emissions or dumping plastics in the ocean or mining for fossil fuels. We need to turn this into a regenerative economy, bend those arrows around so that resources are not used up, they're used again and again, far more carefully, collectively, creatively, and slowly, so that we work with and within the cycles of the living world, separating the biological materials and allowing nature to do her organic composting, but also the technical materials, human-made materials, that we must learn to mimic nature's loops of restoration and reuse and refurbishing. Some examples from the world of this design, of regenerative design beginning, whether it's regenerative agriculture, an example here, one side of the fence and the other, in New South Wales in Australia, and the sponge city concept in Qinli in China, recognizing that water is coming to the city, so absorb that water, regenerate the ecology of place, regenerate nature in your place. But then also using technical materials, circular construction in the city of Amsterdam. They aim to be 50% circular in their material use by 2030. So all of the materials in this district of the city have a passport recognizing where they've come from, what they're made of, and how they can be reused in future. And then removing fossil fuel traffic like the car-free city centre in Oslo and many other cities, of course, hastened by the COVID crisis that enabled cities to pivot and get rid of traffic that they had long wanted to remove. So cleaning the air and bringing in public transport and far more renewable energy sources of mobility. At the same time as regenerative by design, we need to move away from divisive economies that through infrastructure, through regulation, through privilege and inheritance, tend to capture opportunity and value in the hands of a few. We need to create instead distributive economies that share opportunity and value with all who co-create it. And this will enable us to get people out of the hole in the donut rather than seeing many left behind while others accumulate wealth. A few examples again from around the world of particular ways that this can be done, from solar microgrids in Kenya and in many other countries, of course, where the community comes to own the source of wealth creation, which is the power to generate electricity. It creates jobs, of course, too, in those who become engineers of maintaining them. Rapid transit in Curitiba in Brazil. If you live outside the city, it's really clear here, the bus has a dedicated lane. It's the fastest, most efficient and cheapest way. It's redistributive of transport opportunity for low-income households. Affordable housing in the city of Vienna. Did you know that over 60% of people in the city of Vienna live in social housing, which is owned by the city or city-run cooperatives? And that housing is affordable, it's quality, it's central, and it's normal, because the city decided a long time ago that housing is not a luxury investment opportunity for the wealthy, it's a human right for everyone. And so the housing is owned collectively. And that means it's distributed by design. And then an example of open hardware in Togo, a place where a lot of electronic waste has been dumped for decades. They are now connecting with the global Creative Commons, assembling that waste into 3D printers, into open source hardware and open source software, and connecting with the global Creative Commons. So let me pull back and say we began here economics with the first images of 20th century economics, and I believe that 21st century economics must replace them with the big picture of economy and society in the living world. The we of humanity, our collective nature. We can nurture human nature to bring out a collaborative side, not just our competitive side, and giving ourselves a goal that is far richer than mere GDP growth. GDP growth may, of course, in many places be necessary to get to that goal, but it is not the goal. The goal is to thrive within the means of the living planet. So if these are the core ideas, what happens when we want to bring them into practice somewhere? And so let's say, can our city live within the donut? And I invite you to think of this from a town or city that you're in, that you know, in your context. And I'm going to just talk through the tool from a global perspective. If we unroll the donut, we create a space we can dive inside. Between the social foundation and the ecological ceiling, we can think about life here in this city and our city's connection to the rest of the world. And this becomes a canvas for exploration. And we at Doughnut Economics Action Lab are soon going to be releasing this and inviting people to use it as a tool for taking a more holistic imagining of possibilities of transformation in your city. So we go inside, and the first question is this: how can our city become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? And there are 4 questions here, what we call the 4 lenses of the portrait, between the social and the ecological, the local and the global. So let me start with the local social. How can all the people of our city thrive in all of their diversity of who those people are, their histories, culture? How can each one of them have a thriving life? And how can the city be as generous as the wildland next door? I'll speak more to both of these in a moment, but these are the local aspirations of a place, social and ecological. They must be put together with a recognition that every city has a global responsibility because it's connected to global supply chains and has an impact on the whole planet and people worldwide. So how can our city respect the health of the whole planet through its supply chains and impacts, and respect the well-being of all people? Diving in. How can all the people of our city thrive? Wherever that city is, what does thriving mean to people here, depending upon our culture, our traditions, our histories, our values? What is seen as a good standard of life across all of these social dimensions? What has COVID-19 made visible in many places? It's highlighted acute inequalities that were always there, but are now extremely visible and must be acted upon to bring everybody to that social foundation. And then as places aim to transform, we can ask, what aspect of our culture will turn out to be our greatest strength? Is it our diversity? Is it our history? Is it our pride of place? Is it our stories? Which of our values will enable us to make the pivot from what we've inherited to the future we want? Then stepping to the local ecological, how can our city be as generous as the wildland next door? Because we know that the wildland of any place, which varies of every place on the planet, but nature has a genius of place. In each place, she knows how to store carbon and she welcomes wildlife. She cycles water and harvests energy and makes people feel at home. How can we mimic that in our cities? How can we seek to be as generous as nature in the way that cities store carbon and welcome wildlife and cycle water, harvest energy, and make us feel well? So we can ask, across these 7 ecological values, the generosity of nature to cleanse the air and house biodiversity, how can cities be built or be retro-built to store more carbon and house more wildlife, to harvest solar energy on the rooftops or on solar panels, to manage water, to build soil? Of course, the answer is going to be unique to each place, and it can make a place beautiful because that's what makes us feel at home. Moving to the global ecological, we know that the products we buy, wherever we live in the world, we are buying products that have been made all over the world, whether it's food or clothing, electronics, household products, construction materials. And they have a big impact on the planet through mining, through transport, through processing, through waste, through emissions. How can we reduce our footprint? We saw those red overshoots in the national donuts. How do we reduce that? So these are the 9 planetary boundaries, and every place must be asking itself, how do we transform mobility here to reduce our emissions? How do we create a circular economy here to reduce our material footprint? How do we intervene in sectors like food so that we produce more of our food locally, because we know that food has an impact on every one of these planetary boundaries? A lot of sectoral possibilities for transformation. And then still thinking of those global supply chains, we know that in those very same global supply chains are people who are often involved in precarious, insecure, low paid, vulnerable work. and yet they are supplying the goods and services that make life work and life good for people in cities. How do we respect their rights in those global supply chains and look to that labor behind the label? So we can ask, which corporate companies are headquartered in your city, and what's the business model that they are practicing all over the world? Which multinational brands and retailers are selling their products, selling their clothes and electronics and consumer goods? And what is the labor behind the label? Because it's rarely as beautiful as the brand on the box. How do we find ways through government procurement and through social purchasing to respect the rights of all? So let me pull out, and when we put these four lenses together, we've got a canvas, a space that invites us to think socially and ecologically, locally and globally. And we can put at the center an issue of concern. And I know one issue of concern that features in both my half of the talk and Zeenat's half is around housing and construction. So let me offer from a global perspective the kinds of questions we can use these four lenses to ask. How can our city, wherever we are, create housing that enables people to thrive, that housing that's affordable, that makes us have community, that enables parents to be near their children and to access work? How can we create housing that makes people live well? Housing that also is as generous as the wildland next door, made from locally available materials. It welcomes nature back in. It sequesters carbon. It stores rainwater. It makes us feel like we're part of a living system rather than removed from it. How can we create housing that reduces our material footprint on the planet? So by using local materials instead of transporting across the world, by building in renewable energy, by using passive house design, by using materials that can be used or have been used again and again. And how do we respect the rights of people throughout those global supply chains, from those mining it to those actually involved, migrant labor often involved in construction? How do we use this framework? And I hope what's obvious is that this framework doesn't tell us the answer. The answer comes locally. What this framework does is invite us to ask questions in a holistic way, to look for synergies and connections and possibilities that we didn't otherwise see if we didn't have this whole donut frame of mind. But the answers are generated in each place by the people and the expertise and the knowledge and possibilities of that place. So we've used this framework with cities. This is back in 2019 before COVID, in Portland, Philadelphia, and Amsterdam, but we are working with other places to see how can it be useful in their own policy making. And I'll just end with a couple of examples. The city of Amsterdam took the concept of the donut and put it, as you can see at the top, of their circular policy strategy. So they said, we aim through our circular policy to create a thriving, inclusive, regenerative city for all residents while respecting the planetary boundaries. They aim to be 100% circular in material use by 2050. No one even knows what that means yet, but it's the kind of ambition that starts actually creating new solutions. 50% circular by 2030, and from next year, 10% of all government procurement in the city will involve circular materials. So they're driving that as a long, loud legal message. The city of Brussels, the capital region in Belgium, have used the donut to think about their future and their impact and their relationships in the world from all these four perspectives. So let me end there and say that I've been amazed by the traction that the concept of the donut has had ever since it was first published. People have picked it up and turned it into a tool, often very playfully, in their place to make it practical. And that's what excites me. That's why I co-founded Doughnut Economics Action Lab, which is an online space. We don't have an office, we work remotely, so you are welcome to join us in our platform. Have a browse, you're welcome to become a member. We post their tools of how to turn these ideas into practice in education, in cities, in enterprise, and then we post stories that we are learning from people around the world saying, this is how it worked for us, this is how we put it into practice. I sincerely believe that 21st century economics will be practiced first and theorized later. And so that's a perfect segue for me to hand over to Zeenat to talk about the practice and how these ideas connect to the work she and others are doing in creating a world in which we meet the needs of all within the means of the living planet. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And as always, it's inspirational, motivating, and fills one with energy, so re-energizes to keep going where we are going, which is not a very easy place globally and locally. But let me share my screen, and I'd like to take on from what you've just presented to reflect on how I see our work and some of the work happening in India and South Asia that resonates with this concept. For all those who are from this part of the world, some of the conceptual, some of the thinking would be, or the terminology might be very, very familiar. For the others, may not be, but I'll try and explain as we go forward a little bit. So my thoughts as I've organized it is about the context as we understand, which is South Asia, which is what we are talking about today. How do we bring this thinking down to South Asia and express it in our context? What we've been doing and how the DA group's approach over the last 30 years, in a sense, almost mirrored from the ground up what Kate has been talking about. I will use the example of the built environment, a sector closest to my heart, to express some of the choices and how we make those choices that lead to this double circle. I wrote an editorial in our newsletter, a monthly newsletter for October this month, which actually which picks on this concept and says the donut as a double circle, which is solutions for this part of the world. And so let me just take you through now. So South Asia, I mean, and it's a subcontinent, it's a microcosm of the whole. It's huge, it's diverse. I mean, cultures, materials, geoclimatic contexts, you name it. The interesting part is that it's a very, as a whole, I mean, if I look to Nepal, to Bangladesh, to India, we are a decentralized, distributed settlement and how we live across the region. We are rural, but we are also hugely small and medium town, growing faster. Although we are known for those large mega cities, which will be the top 5 mega cities of the world in the next few years, but the nature of our growth is actually decentralized, distributed. We are also known, unfortunately, for our disparity. We are highly inequitous. I think, except for maybe the two ends, except for Bhutan a bit and Sri Lanka, there is a huge amount of disparity, with India taking the cake of it. There's a huge unemployment. It's a young region. India leads in the youth, but as a whole, it's a young region. There's a huge demand for jobs. So jobs and unemployment are something that we are always faced with for whatever we do, and I don't think we can look away from it as part of the responsible solutions that we put out. And the last D is the doorstep. We are at the threshold of a green transition, should we choose to, as a region, as a country in India, and as each country. And I think that's the big challenge that we have. A snapshot, I don't think you can make too much of the text here, but just to give you a brief, this is from the 2021 report of UNSCAP on the progress of the SDGs in this part of the world, and we are falling short in almost everything that we had promised. If you look at the boxes on the large thing, you see a whole lot of yellows, which are telling you that you are sort of moving, but you need a huge amount of acceleration. You do see quite a few reds in some cases, and those are critical reds, especially in the kind of choices we are making in consumption and production systems. And there is a lot of gray in which we don't seem to be doing much, or at least have no data or no strategy or no methods. And I think that's dangerous. If you start looking at the other table, you see that there are cases where we are actually reversing. COVID has had a shock, but this kind of a figure, if I look back 20 2019, even before COVID, the graph wasn't very different. So, on every item, we are falling short. A wake-up call. The prime concerns for South Asia remain very complex: the poverty, vulnerability, the food, water, energy security, livelihood. So despite the fact that we have, large middle class populations going up, but we are, this is all our meta indicators, the micro indicators on the ground. They're telling us that we are not doing great. And coupled with that is our growth model, which Kate also spoke about, which is still heavily tilted towards intensities of energy and material use, towards waste without adequate looping back of the resources, and it is huge inequity and marginalization. The transitions that we are looking for, key priorities, if I may say, we obviously, with such a complex set of problems, the solutions are also going to be complex. But the solutions, the core principles in our mind at DA have always been that you need to look at growth or prosperity models, I should say, which address the demand for the more material and energy, because you have a huge population across the region that requires more, but it has to be done in a manner that generates decent jobs and sustainable livelihoods. It cannot be done in an iniquitous manner, but it also enables the access of opportunity for everybody, especially as we transition towards the greener, more renewable energy mix in our energy baskets, more efficiencies in our cement production systems, etc. We need to see that there were all of those who were left behind in the socioeconomic order, who have to be part of this, who have to have a stake in this new prosperity story that we are talking about. And from a just transition perspective, normally justice is seen as to who will be hurt most or lose most. But I think in addition to the who will lose most in this region, we have to see how will we ensure that those who are already left behind are also part of this story, and therefore enhancing the agency of local communities and local stakeholders to become self-reliant and to prosper becomes a very, very important agenda of anything that we do. This is an inspiration from Mahatma Gandhi. I mean, if we look back to the concepts of Swaraj, of Advaita, of being integrated with and one with the environment, the issue of trusteeship, of responsibility of your natural systems, of Sarvodaya and of Antodaya, looking at the last person who's not received anything, that, and we always had that in our notebooks in school. I remember of the talisman that Gandhi gave. So I think that this is more relevant today than ever in our lives, and that connects so well with the local global social ecological lens that Kate has been talking about. What are we looking for? We are looking for thriving societies. We're looking for prosperity, but we are looking for that within the healthy natural systems, because that is our fundamental resource base. But we are also looking for responsible societies. So, and the fact that we are on that threshold, taking that leap forward, in a climate constrained world, in a resource constrained world, the responsibility to the global system becomes that much more, despite the fact that we may tell ourselves that we are the wronged party historically. Yet the responsibility is something that we must take. The leadership we must give. This is Development Alternatives, which we have founded 30 years. Actually, we are going to be 40 years now. It was 39 plus. And the three pillars of sustainability guided us with a very strong set of principles of Antodaya, putting the last first: fairness, polluter pays responsibilities, participation and inclusion, and Advait, which is systemic thinking, all as part of how we work. Defining the programmatic interventions that Development Alternatives does across these three core pillars, the kind of work that we do across construction systems, agriculture systems, water systems. We look at technology, entrepreneurship, gender concerns, etc. So it's a complex organization, but basically looking across and focusing with our eyes on the 5 aspects of what are we innovating in terms of technologies, market models, business models, how are we incubating them, how are we demonstrating and building capacities on the ground, and how are we making sure we have the right impact and influence both the practice and policy. In 2016, we had put out a book called To Choose Our Future, between 2015 and 2016, just when the SDGs were coming out. And this, in a sense, summarized our thinking. And I am adapting from that book the diagram that we had then looked at with respect to how we see the role of economy in this transition. And just as Kate said, that it's the economies at the pivot. And we are the goal, the aim is really to look at the social well-being within a healthy ecosystem and the balance between these two. We are, and when we look at that, obviously it is now this double circle, the donut that is guiding our frame, has always been as we go forward. Let me take you through a few practical examples of the work that we've done that might illustrate what I've been talking about. So I'm going to use the construction sector and the human settlements arena. This is what we are grappling with. We have been dealing with, and we have been trying to find solutions for this scenario of the construction sector. And I'm now talking India. I'm sorry, I have to bring it down to the local. And so I'm now talking India. We are looking at increasing pollution in the construction sector. We are looking at issues of equity and access in the human settlement space. We are looking at climate issues. You all know, you are from the climate sector. You know the scale of GHG emissions from the construction sector. You know, with all of this, we see an increasing demand that is still energy intensive and resource intensive, despite all that the warning bells and the technological advancements, and yet we see movement in issues still energy and resource intensive. I think significant to this intensity is the thing that is hitting us most now locally is the resource conflicts between sectors, between brick and food, for example. Many parts of this country have banned soil extraction for brick making. We know that. What is also hitting us is that our skills are still not adequate, and that we still haven't been able to deal with at the human settlement level wastes and wastewater. So all kinds of supposed externalities which are now very much internal into our system. So you see here the conflict between brick making and agriculture with the brick fields at the back. You see the conflict between soil. I think Bangalore has been at the center of this sand war for quite some time. And so we've been working on looking at where are the materials, which are the spaces which where we need to start addressing fast and first. And you'll see that the ones in the red are problem materials as far as our country is concerned, and their problem also comes from the fact that they have a huge opportunity cost conflict of use issue. But there is another side, and we see resources that are the waste of the industrial revolution within the country, the industrialization in the country, and you see ash, you see marble dust. This incidentally is from western part. This is from Rajasthan, of about I think 16 square kilometers, about 6 feet deep pile of marble dust that is coming from marble polishing factories. And here you have the fly ash from the thermal power plants. You have very interesting, and something that India has always seen as a secondary material, but materials that are the future as we go forward. New materials from the way we are developing, the space we are developing, and mining the city is definitely something that we need to look at. And so for us, what really is the imperative, in this sector? We look at cleaner and circular production. We look at more materials because you have about 40 million that need housing. You need improved access. So you need the business models and the delivery models that can improve the access to these materials, to cleaner, greener materials. You need the procurement systems that will need to change. We need affordability, not just from the livelihood opportunities, but also financial options that will enable those 40 million to access greener materials, better housing. And of course, you need value creation and local value retention. This becomes a key to the kind of business models that we are looking at when we are designing these. So it's not just technologies. A technology is just hardware and a guidebook to work. It's actually the financial model, the business model, and the cooperative model that goes behind getting the technology to my doorstep, which becomes interesting. And what you see in the picture here up there is a fly ash brick from an enterprise. Then is the vertical shaft brick kiln, another way of making red bricks that will save carbon. Down below is an enterprise in the hills making roofing elements for the local market. Let me go where. Yeah, and so we see potential that should be driving our new models. Potential of not just savings in costs and environmental impact, but potentials in new green businesses, new skills, and potentials across the value chain of the building construction sector. Some examples where these have been used. This is the application of a new kind of cement called the LC3, limestone calcified clay cement. It's basically out of this China clay mine waste, and it replaces limestone to a considerable degree more than your pozzolana cement, and it therefore also reduces the carbon content in the cement. And it's a breakthrough. The cement industry is looking at it very carefully because they know the way they are going, they don't have limestone deposits in the country for more than 20 years now, maybe 25. I think that's what the data says. And so they're also looking at their survivals and new technologies that would reduce the virgin material are definitely welcome. You see the ash that I was talking about from thermal power plants. Hopefully, we will have less and less of this material as the power plants close down, but we still have so much on the ground that I think 3 generations of ours can be making bricks out of them and building their homes. This is an example from our own building in New Delhi. What you see on the top was built out of earth, a material that those in Bangalore know is very popularly used. And the one below it is almost 80% material recovery from the older one back into the new building. When the older one had lost its had completed its useful life, we actually converted it into a new building, which is an iconic building in New Delhi for office applications, and demonstrates that it's possible to have a low carbon, low material footprint building that is also produced in a manner that had provided work, useful work, local value creation, and local value retention. All of the material came from around, and all of the labor and all of the skills was from the local area. Some of the kind of production units that we began with, I mean, in the late 80s, early 90s, we were looking at which are still very popular in the northern part of the country, the microconcrete roofing tile, probably a most lucrative small business enterprise in rural and peri-urban areas for roofing elements. The compressed earth block equipment, which and both of these, small enterprises that can produce materials for local areas, for fly ash, women-based enterprises for building materials of all kinds. And through our work in the housing, especially in the rural housing space, we saw as we use these materials, trained the people, had institutional mechanisms, artisan clusters, building centers who were adopting this, and we were measuring the change that was happening, the transformation in not just quality of construction, but also in the fact that you could measure now reduction in carbon footprints, reduction in material footprints, and how much monies and how was being retained in the local economy, and so the benefits that the local economy were having. I mean, you see these pictures. The one that looks like gray housing is from Punjab. The other one is from Karaikal in Pondicherry. The two colorful buildings are from central India, Madhya Pradesh. The tall building is from Uttarakhand. That's one of the most recent initiatives. We also have been working to put this to look at these indicators, to measure them, to be able to support public procurement and design design solutions that architects make and developers make, and how do we get to support the larger ecosystem. And so the Marship initiative, supported by the UNEP One Planet network, enabled the sort of codification into the key parameters relevant for this region, and of course very strong database measurements exercises that were done to create technology templates and tools that would enable people to choose to make the kind of choices that they would when they're building doing their developments. And then we tested these also very recently in the last 2 years in Uttarakhand, and you saw the building that came up. We addressed the core problems. So coming down from nation right down to a small district arena in Uttarkashi, we looked at the core issues, we looked at the problems, we looked at the main parameters that we would like to pick out of those 18 for that region, and defined how we will, how will we use them then to choose. And we, through participatory exercises at the ground level, and came up with some solutions for production of materials and for the construction system that would be applied. And after doing that, we assessed them against the same mechanism and found much better results with the local stabilized system rather than what they were using, which was a red brick system right at the bottom that you see being brought in from the plains. Or even in the roofing systems, the new mechanism of pine shingles, which had been totally lost and forgotten, how we could bring it back and convert it into a local production unit that people could then replicate. So this is just a picture while the construction was still going on and the enterprises were being set up on the side. I want to use this. I mean, I'm coming to the end of my few slides, but this is not India. This is the United States. This is one of those things that has always inspired me. at a scale, at a city scale. When I look at how cities at that scale can also make decisions which are wise sometimes. And so this is the Catskills providing safe water to New York City. And looking down back to our own work, our own mini Catskills, that sense, is in Bundelkhand, central India, where we've been working on water harvesting through check dams, through watershed management, working with the communities to build those small structures and saving water, but then connecting it to the villages who are getting now piped water through their local system and a solar pump, managing it their own. And this is now a locally owned, locally managed system of water harvesting and safe water supply, totally autonomous, not linked to the Sarkari government system of long pipelines. Let me go quickly. We from the rural, we jumped to urban. We were looking at Dehradun to see, okay, what starts happening in small cities and towns, and we were addressing the water, the water cycle, the water system there, to understand the footprints, both energy footprints, carbon footprints, as well as the resource footprints. And lo and behold, you find very similar solutions as we looked around that are possible, which cities are not really very keen to look at for a variety of reasons at the moment. So you have all of these, small startup solutions that are across the country, providing you circular models, modular systems, reduced energy footprints, providing basic needs, and very inclusive in design, and promoting active community ownership. So the point I'm making is that the technological solutions and the business solutions exist. What we now need is to bring them at a platform to start to proliferate, to start talking to city governments, to start talking to more institutional systems, so that you are able to see them as mainstream and not as a startup maverick. This has to be the mainstream. And not just from the housing sector now. I mean, I thought I'd give you a snapshot of all the others. You see e-mobility, locally driven transport. You see, Kate spoke about rural energy, so microgrids. There are now n number of microgrid solutions across the country that are enabling local businesses to run, that are enabling local enterprises to run, construction enterprises, composting systems. Our own work across the country is now working with clusters of artisans, community groups to look at this. And the one thing that they have in common is that they're all locally owned, they're locally managed, and they are getting those who were left behind a stake in this transition of the new resilient, green, and just future. We've been working with and discussing with the Doughnut Economics Action Lab, and as we build our own interventions with small municipalities in the country, and building a center of excellence for resilient human settlements in the North Indian Himalayan region with university, which is the Dehradun Institute of Technology, and our on a collaborative platform called 11. And the key areas that this center platform is going to be looking at to start with is within the human settlement space, but also linking with other related sectors such as tourism. And and so that's where we are at the moment, building the economic models, and also building the small businesses, and bringing these small businesses at the same platform with where the institutional systems are. So we're trying to do a municipality small enterprise link and being able, and attempting to explain to the municipalities that this is where the future is. And I think it would be great if we can have more of you join us also in that endeavor. Thank you. Incidentally, we don't know who's looking ahead and who's looking at the back, but I think both the directions become important in this part of the world. Thanks a lot for your patience.
Thank you so much, Zeenat, for that. We have a lot of questions for both Kate and Zeenat. So I think we can just skip to those questions. Or if you have anything to discuss between the two of you, Kate and Zeenat, we can do that for 2 minutes. And then we can just go for the questions.
Well, there's one point, I so enjoyed Zeenat's presentation, and there was one point that I want to add, reflecting on it, as she said so compellingly, technology is just a hardware with a handbook. What matters is the business model and the financial model. And so I just want to reflect on the design of enterprise and the design of businesses, because yes, you can have a technology, but to what purpose is it put? And that will be shaped by the business model of how it's owned and the financial model. So at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, we always say whether we're looking at a government in a city or indeed a business, and I'm going to talk about a business here, we need to look at the design, not of its technologies only, but the design of the business itself. And there are 5 design traits that and I invite everybody to look at every business that you encounter through these lenses, right? These are my 5 design traits here. So the first one is purpose. Why does this business exist? What is it in service to in the world? The second one is to say, how is that business networked? How does it relate to its customers, to its suppliers, to its own employees, to the wider ecosystem of industry of which it's a part? Does it see everybody else as a competitor, or does it see them as a potential collaborator? Because industries need collaboration. Governance, how is the enterprise governed? Who has voice in decision making? What are the metrics of success? But then crucially, how is the business owned? And just some of the examples Zeenat was ending with there, saying, and I just want to say these are all locally owned and managed. Who owns the enterprise can vary massively, whether it's the state or shareholders or venture capitalists or a private entrepreneur or a family or the employees or the community. And how it's owned profoundly shapes how it's financed, where that money is coming from, but also what that money is demanding, and whether that money is investing because it's there for the purpose. And of course, it has to be financially viable, but it's there to generate this purpose of ecologically restorative housing, socially owned and community enriching enterprise. Or is the finance there because it's saying, well, I'm just here for the highest, fastest financial return, and cut the corners on your purpose, just give me my returns. So these 5 design traits profoundly shape what business can be and do in the world. And as much as we need to redesign the technologies we use, and I love the examples Zeenat was showing, we need to redesign the enterprises themselves. And what I was hearing behind so many of those successful examples were redesigned enterprises that may be going back to very old designs of cooperatives, but we need to pair that together with modern forms of access to finance, access to technologies, access to the commons, so that we get the best enterprise design to give this transformation the best chance it has. I'd love to hear Zeenat's reflection on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Kate. You could have the best, greenest technology, but it would be the most inequitous in the world. And I think that's something that we have to be absolutely aware of. And ownership, stakeholding is so critical that we found. We've also found in our work because now we focus on small sector. We say, okay, this is where the new world is. So we focus on the small sector. We realize that the ecosystem on the ground is something that you have to address. You have to look at who are your role models on the ground, who are your market systems on the ground, who are your support things, and so there are layers, and at every layer you need to work on those issues. So yes, absolutely, that networking, the fact that you need to have ownership, and financing. My God, this is now the key arena. We are seeing people the venture capitalists are still not looking at the kind of ecological returns. You're looking at 18% fast returns. I mean, I think the lowest people go down to is 13%, but you still need to be break even within 3 years. And this is, it is crazy because you are looking at slow capital here, and you because the rest of the value is so high. And I think the area now to work on is this: what is the triple bottom line of the small enterprise, and how can financial systems start responding to those triple bottom lines? Because unless they do that, they will still be financing the old brown economy, if I may say so. They're not fit for purpose at all. And so that's the challenge we have right now. How do you get monies into this system? And cooperation is probably one of the ways. Sometimes you find resources which are not coming from those very traditional systems. But I mean, we have an example of a financing, of a local financing initiative that finances small enterprises called Rangde. It crowdsources finance and for loans and credits to small entrepreneurs. So there are now very interesting ways that is coming, and I think that's where the world has to move. There's no other future. That is the future.
Thank you, Zeenat and Kate. Let's just go to the questions, because there are a lot of questions coming up. Would you want to look at the questions, or would you want me to convey the questions?
You choose one for us, Smriti.
Yeah.
All right. So we do have one in the chat box by Sharad Lele. This goes to Kate. It says, or if I could have, okay. So it says, it says, Kate, the misconstrued 20th century economics that you presented so well is itself a product of a particular structure of the economy vis-a-vis capitalism, and a political system that has become captive to this structure and centralized itself. True. Could you spell out what your position is on the changes in the economic and political structures that are required to make progress in the direction you have outlined so well? So that's by Sharad.
Okay, well, thank you. And that's a big and excellent, powerful question. I'm going to come back here. When we work with cities, and some of the cities we've worked with come back and said, if we really want to bring about this transformation, we know we need to transform. And I would say these same 5 design traits could be very useful for interrogating the political design of the institutions we've inherited. So what is the purpose? Is it here to grow, or are we here to thrive? How are we networked? And this goes to some of the points raised in the question about the political capture of politics by invested business interests, through corruption, through payoffs, through revolving doors. So we need to unearth and make visible the networks that should not be there, and the old vested interests and corruption that needs to be left behind, in order to have to reorient political institutions and actors towards engaging authentically with the residents of place and more deliberative forms of democracy. Also around governance, who has voice in decision making? Is it vested political powers, or is it the constituents of a place? And how do we change that? But then I come back here down to ownership. So for example, if I'm thinking at the scale of a city or a town, how are the sources of wealth creation owned? Who owns them? Who owns the land? Who owns the housing? I gave an example from Vienna, where the housing is predominantly owned by the city in order to ensure it as a human right, whereas many, many other cities in Europe and beyond have predominantly privately owned land and housing. And so housing becomes a speculative asset, and the people of the city can literally no longer afford to live there because it's being treated as a sort of capitalist rental asset. Crucial questions around who owns the enterprises. Are they multinational companies that many places desire for them to come and be based there, but then they often will take all their earnings, pay tax not there, but almost not anywhere. And so what about if you do what's known as community wealth building and you invest in building up the local economy? Again, the examples that Zeenat was showing, because that money is sticky. It sticks around because it's invested in enterprises that are owned by families and communities and people who stay in a place and we spend their money in that place. And then we come down to finance, which is at the heart of the capitalist design, which is money that is designed to beget money in pursuit of return, in pursuit of itself, which is what Aristotle said was the strangest of all ways, the most unnatural way to get wealth, was to create money that begets money that begets money, and that aims to grow endlessly. So I think we need to deeply reflect on our institutions. And if anyone ever says, oh, we want to use Doughnut Economics as a form of green capitalism or rethinking capitalism or reimagining capitalism, we say, please don't. Because if you do that, you're leaving something on the table called capitalism and you're merely reimagining it or greening it. But what is that thing that you don't want to touch? We want to open the box and question all of those designs because we think it's essential to dive much deeper. And I think we need, at the root of it down here, we need to reinvent the design of finance so that finance is in service to enterprise, that is in service to life. We've currently got, as we've seen, financial institutions that tend to be in service to themselves. So we need a revolution in the design of finance as well as the design of enterprise and political governance. So I'm not going to try and solve all of it, but for me, these 5 design traits really help us see where the designs of the political and economic institutions we've inherited have gone wrong and how redesigning them must be part of transforming this.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you so much, Kate. A question to Zeenat now. I don't know who the question is from, but it goes, how different are rural and urban community interactions, Zeenat? For example, you spoke about Bundelkhand and Dehradun. In these 2 cases, what were the major challenges you came across with respect to local community interaction?
I think at the heart of it, we're both talking about human settlement issues, one more agrarian, the other more service industry located, but that's where I think the similarity ends, because there is a lot more complexity as you move into the urban context. The sense of place that the rural community has, despite the fact that it may have a lot more rigidity at the community level to move forward in the beginning. And I think it's in the beginning, because once you break through that, then the fact that the rural community has a sense of a very strong sense of place, which gets lost as we go into the urban context a little bit, is very, very interesting, and it helps move things faster. I would think that if it were not for energy, electricity, if it were not for alternative forms of livelihood, the rural arena has actually more agency than the urban citizen has, simply because of the scale. I think the scale and the distance between them and their governance system. An added complexity in our country is the role of caste, and we should not forget that there is a more anonymity within the urban space that helps things a little bit, not too much, which is not there in the rural space. There is a lot of division in that, but once you've got around to understanding that, the rural communities, I have found in my experience, have higher agency. Ability to come together is much stronger. But our experience with Dehradun, on the other hand, was that there is a strong civil society in Dehradun. It's actually not it's very much like Bangalore. I mean, I often call Dehradun the Bangalore of the North, because of the level of education, the level of awareness, the kind of civil society action that happens there. But the scale is larger. The distance between community groups and their government is much more. Therefore, the distance between decision making is much more. And so those distinctions mean that you at a city scale you have less agency. That's a current assessment I would make. I think if I could go deeper, maybe I may change my views a bit, but a current assessment really is that the sense of that the agency of the community then becomes at the city scale, it reduces. So you have to bring them down at the neighborhood scale, the ward or the neighborhood scale, for them to do something. That's when they start associating. That's when the city starts associating, unless there is something major. Like right now, there's a Sdara for tree cutting agitation happening there. The city is up in arms. There's also a huge amount of the havoc from the monsoons, and so the city is up in arms. And so we do see that distinction: a higher complexity, greater distance, less sense of place in the urban space.
Thanks, Zeenat.
Yeah.
There's so many questions, but I'll just combine 2 questions and I'll go for 3 more questions until we end this. So the 2 questions, one, I don't know who the question is from, but it's a question about the term GDP. Okay, the effectiveness of GDP as a measure of growth has been discredited time and time again by numerous economists. However, it still continues to be the basis of governmental policies all over the world. How do you envision we bring about a change from this perspective on a national and global scale? I'll just link another question to this, and also on the quantitativeness of values. For example, the question is from Ishan. The standard economic models use monetary value to estimate the worth of industries. How do we quantitatively estimate the value? For example, space or defense or entertainment industries using the donut model. Is it even possible to do so? So I think that's for Kate. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll pick up on the first one on GDP. Yes, the effectiveness of GDP has been discredited ever since, I think, Robert Kennedy made a speech in 1968 saying, he was running to be the US president, And he said, GDP measures everything except that which makes life worth living. And he was questioning it, which is extraordinary. But gosh, that was over 50 years ago. And so this critique is long and old and familiar, and yet politicians still continue to use it. So I think there's 2 strands there. One, I believe we are moving from a single metric indicator to a dashboard of indicators. And that's why when we show the donut, let me grab it, hang on. Right, the donut is a dashboard. And as I showed you, the national donuts, once you start to see those, like if I could, I showed you national donuts from Malawi and India and China and the US, and then I gave you their GDP number underneath. Now, which gave you more information? Which told you more about the country? It's the donut, because it's a dashboard. It tells us an array of information. And I believe that it's happening now. I mean, the impacts of climate breakdown, the loss of availability of water, the scarcity of materials. Zeenat's talk was full of metrics about the scarcity of materials. Any government that has any sanity will start realizing that we need to care about the material availability and quality and the metrics of the living world and the health of the living world and the health of people, not just the numbers that seem to add up as a financial value in GDP. It doesn't tell us where we need to get to. It doesn't enable us to steer well if we want to guide our economies. So the first project is to make those natural and social metrics available, make them more in real time. GDP comes out every quarter because a lot of money goes into measuring that. But we're in the middle of a data revolution, and scientists are able to measure the CO2 in the air. They can measure the trees breathing. We can, most people have now a mobile phone. We can get self-reported data. There are many, many ways we can gather data that enable us to have real-time living dashboards in a way that was never possible 100 years ago when Simon Kuznets first created GDP. So to me, that's the project of the dashboard of metrics. But the other thing is, one of the reasons why policymakers are still hung up on GDP is because we have economies that are structurally dependent upon endless growth. Last century and the use of fossil fuels the hidden value of that energy, or the hidden secret that the fossil fuel energy allowed economies to grow, made it come to be believed that growth is a normal and natural and stable condition. And now our economies, from our pension funds to the ways that employment are created to what's valued, are dependent upon endless growth. And no wonder policymakers look at GDP, because if it stops growing, they know they'll get a recession, they know they'll get a deficit, they'll get a trade balance problem. So we need to unhook our economies from endless growth. Now, that's a very different conversation, where I'm sitting in the UK, one of the richest nations in the world, which I believe has to move away from pursuing yet more growth, and a country like India that, because of massive human deprivation, has reason to grow, but must do it in the ways that Zeenat showed, in a transformed way, so that it doesn't destroy planetary boundaries in the way that all countries before have done. So new metrics that measure the world as a dashboard and life in her own terms, not monetary terms. And we need to unhook ourselves from the addiction to endless growth. That's a whole big other conversation, but I think it's where a lot of the work needs to be done.
Thanks, Kate. Another question here. It says, how do we propagate the change in the manner of looking at economic growth in a donut model to policymakers and to residents in developing countries? Though Kate was against the word developing countries. And then the question goes, how is the process different from the adoption process in the developed countries?
I'm just sharing my slides in the chat box, by the way. So we're working with, we were at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, our principle is go where the energy is. And so we were first approached by cities, and we were first approached by cities in the global north, which made sense to me because they have the responsibility to move first and fastest. And so we started working with cities in the global north, and those 4 lenses that I showed you were our method of turning that tool into something that policymakers can use. We are Doughnut Economics Action Lab. It's all about action, and it's a lab because we're learning. So we're still in the early days of learning. How do we make these tools as relevant and useful as possible to policymakers? We're finding they are useful. Policymakers who want to see bigger, who want to escape from thinking only about GDP, who want a framework that enables them to have a bigger, longer vision and ambition. So we're still developing those tools. How does it differ from the global north to the global south? Well, and that's exactly what I've enjoyed hearing Zeenat's examples of today. I think in the global north, the question about is it growth or thriving is a much more real choice and a realization. Whereas I think in the global south, many places in the global south, there will be GDP growth in order to thrive. And so it will be growth of a different quality and a different kind, and ecologically far more restorative, but required still to meet people's needs. I really liked the adaptation that Zeenat made and of the local aspirations and the global responsibilities of the 4 lenses that I showed. And what I heard there was saying, one, as Zeenat said, India may have low income per capita, but is also a rising power in the region and in the world, and therefore does have global responsibilities as the nation grows, just as China. We've seen China's impact in the world. And so if India can do that with a global responsibility and awareness of its impact on people and planet worldwide, that will be transformative in terms of the rise of a superpower. Most superpowers have done that without paying attention to impact on people and planet. What would it look like for India to rise with that attention? I think is a really beautiful nuance of how that can be held differently. And lastly, I'll say, it's working with partners like Development Alternatives that make these ideas relevant and authentic in different contexts. And it's not for me to make that adaptation, it's yourselves in your regional context to decide these tools are useful, but to be adapted to make sense from the perspective and the ethics and values of your own culture and time.
I think and I'd like to add to that, our experience, for example, in the state of Bihar with the government of Bihar. So here you are talking to the policymakers, and there are some, it's not that all of them are looking at it from only a total GDP perspective. There are quite a few of them in the governments who understand that there is a way, there's a different path that they have to move. And our experience with the government of Bihar has been very interesting, because not only have they understood we thought when we were talking about greening the brick sector with them, we thought that the first thing that they would, that the ears would sort of prick up would be on the carbon numbers. But no, the first thing that hit them was the fact that this is a sector that eats up agriculture land. And it's an agriculture state. It's a state which has huge amounts of area that does rice farming. And if you were to take away all that soil and make only bricks out of it, where is that going to go? And it really was the first thing that they used to say, no, we need to move away. And so it's not fast, but it's been a gradual step-by-step process of putting in systems of supporting small entrepreneurs, putting in systems of aggregating demand, putting in systems of procurement and quality assurance information. So, you need all of those tools and support systems that the policymakers will need when they need to make those decisions. And we just have to do that work for them and with them, I'd say. And that's how it grows. It doesn't grow in one day. It's been 6 years we've been working with the government of Bihar. We moved from 20 fly ash enterprises in 2017 to 240 plus now. Bihar, Orissa, now Assam. There are states that are taking it up. So it's not as if it's all a black hole, but it's slow. It's slow, and the unfortunate part is that one part of the government moves in one direction, the other part of the policy making system, which is because they are still siloed, they move in another direction, and there's a within the policy system itself there is a conflict. That is something that we have to deal with all the time. The other point that I would like to make is when Kate spoke about this capitalist model, the fact is that the question that we should now continuously ask ourselves is, what is your money building or saving? The moment you start seeing the fact that you have a 10%, and this is India, you have 10% of the people you can count on your hands who hold 80% of the wealth. I think it's the citizens of the country who are going to be asking that question to say, are we counting really right? Are we counting what needs to be counted? Are we measuring what needs to be measured? And that's where I think the dashboard of the donut is so important.
Can I have one point to what Zeenat was just saying about how it can be slow? It can be so slow, and I think we can often lose heart about how slow transformation is. And yet she ended her talk saying, we are on the doorstep. You began your talk saying, we're on the doorstep of a green revolution if we choose it. And I want to share my screen one more time to see an extraordinary revolution that happened. So this is New York City. In 1900, this was the Easter morning parade, 1900, and there was just one car surrounded by horses and carts. And within just over a decade, there was only one horse and cart surrounded by cars. Now, that was a revolution of fossil fuel use. And much of the work that we're doing now is to turn that story in the other direction. How do we turn it? But I think transformation and change can take far longer than we expect to get started. And then it can happen far faster than we would have imagined. And we've seen that with, say, the mobile phone revolution. We've seen that, I think, with the spread of microcredit, even with the spread of microgrids. So I take hope from this, because sometimes it's, when Zeenat says it, and it's slow, and you think, do we have time to go slow? And yet what is it that needs to happen to tip to make this suddenly go fast? And we're seeing it with solar energy. So I want us to leave on that possibility of transformation.
Thank you so much. There's no other way to end it than the way Kate and Zeenat ended it. But I would just like to share just 2 slides to the gathering here, and also to Kate and Zeenat about Future Earth and where we are. Glad to introduce 3 new global hubs in Asia. That's in India, China, and Taiwan. And this is how we work. We work with a group of 27 global research networks to make sure that scientists, society, policymakers work together to bring about the changes. And okay, and also this is it. Now we're so much talking about the action labs, we're talking about Zeenat works and development forums. So this is exactly what we're trying to do even at Indian Institute of Science, where we're trying to bring in the concept of food, health, water, air, all within the planetary boundary. And also, we know that 80%, 90% of species in Asia is yet to be developed. So we're starting to see why not plan it from that angle onwards. And I would like to welcome everybody to join us on Future Earth. And also there is a forum where this talk, this speech, and a series of these kind of speeches and videos will be put up on the internet. So with that, I would like to, end this conversation. And I would like to thank Zeenat and Kate and also Professor Satish here, if you would like to say a few words.
Thank you. Thanks, Smriti. I would like, on behalf of the Vecha Center for Climate Change and Future Earth Global Secretariat South Asia, I would like to thank Kate and Zeenat for this very important and interesting session. And thanks for accepting our invitation in your extremely busy schedule. Thanks, Smriti and team, for conducting this very timely session topic. And thank you all for attending this session.
Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you very much.
It was an honor.
Yes,
Thank you
me
so
too.
much, Zeenat and Kate.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.